There are places on this earth that time forgot to claim. Not ruins, not relics of civilizations long dead, but living monuments, structures so old, so impossibly preserved, that walking through their doors feels like stepping backward through centuries. And deep in the wooded folds of northern England, hidden from modern roads and swallowed by ancient forests, stands one such place. A mansion, not a castle built for war, not a palace built for show, but a house, Eldenford House, built for something far more enduring, lineage. For nearly 1,000 years, this estate has stood. Empires rose and fell around it. Monarchies collapsed. Wars scorched the land. Technologies that would have seemed like magic to its founders now pulse through every corner of the modern world. But Eldenford remained untouched, unchanged, watching. When preservationists finally gained access to the property in the early 21st century, after decades of legal battles, lost records, and a family tree that seemed to deliberately erase its own existence, they discovered something that defied every expectation. The house wasn't just old, it was frozen. Candles still held half-melted wax, as if blown out only yesterday. A chess game sat mid-match on a table in the drawing room, pieces positioned as though the players had simply stepped away and never returned. Letters dated 1923 lay unopened on a desk, their seals unbroken. A child's wooden toy rested on a bed in a nursery that hadn't held a child in generations. Everything was exactly where it had been left, not abandoned in caves, not ransacked by bohem or looters, but preserved with an eerie, deliberate care, as if someone had locked the doors one morning and decided that nothing inside would ever be allowed to change again. Local legends had always whispered about Eldenford House, stories passed down through generations, told in pubs and around fires, always with the same warning. Don't go near the old manor. The family never left. They're still there, watching. Most dismissed it as folklore, the ghost stories small towns tell to entertain themselves. But when historians entered the estate for the first time in nearly a century, they began to wonder if the stories weren't folklore at all, but memory. Because Eldenford House doesn't feel empty. Even now, with every room cataloged and photographed, with researchers documenting every artifact and analyzing every layer of construction, there is a presence that cannot be measured or explained. The air is heavier here, sounds echo differently, shadows fall in ways that don't quite match the light, and then there are the rooms no one can explain. The hidden corridor discovered behind fireplaces, the sealed doorways behind bookshelves, the east wing chamber with walls twice as thick as any normal construction, a room that modern tools cannot breach, that ground-penetrating scans reveal shapes inside but no clear answers, a room that has remained locked for centuries, and no one knows why. This is not a story about architecture, though the mansion's construction spans nearly every era of English history. Medieval stone halls blending into Tudor chambers, Georgian libraries adjoining Victorian conservatories. This is not a story about wealth, though the family who built this place once held influence that shaped kingdoms. This is a story about secrecy, about a single bloodline that guarded something so carefully, so obsessively, that they withdrew from the world entirely, that chose preservation over progress, that valued silence over survival. And when the last heir, Clara Eldenford, locked the doors in 1923 and vanished without a trace, she left behind more than an empty house. She left behind a mystery that has haunted historians, archaeologists, and locals for over a century. What could a family hide for 1,000 years? What secret was valuable enough to fracture their lineage, drain their fortune, and ultimately erase them from history? And why, after all this time, does Eldenford House still refuse to give up its answers? Every great house begins with a single stone. For Eldenford, that stone was laid in 1047 by a man named Alaric, a knight who had survived a war that killed nearly everyone he marched beside. History remembers little about Alaric of Eldenford. No grand titles, no royal blood, just a soldier who returned from a campaign that left the countryside littered with the bodies of men who would never see home again. But Alaric came back with something more valuable than titles: land. A gift from a grateful lord whose life he had saved. A stretch of wooded hills in northern England, far enough from cities to remain untouched by the chaos of conquest, close enough to trade routes to build something lasting. And Alaric, having seen enough death to understand the fragility of life, made a vow that would define his descendants for the next millennium. This house will stand, this family will endure. He married strategically, not for love, though perhaps that came later, but for survival. His bride Isolde was the daughter of a rising merchant clan whose wealth came not from swords but from trade, wool, grain, shipping contracts that connected England to the continent. Together they built the first wing of what would become Eldenford House. Not a castle, not a fortress, a home. Stone walls thick enough to last centuries. A great hall with a fireplace large enough to roast an entire ox. Chambers for children they hoped would carry the family forward. And a chapel, small, private, meant only for the family, where every generation would swear the same oath Alaric once made. Preserve what we have built. Protect what we have been given. Pass it forward, unchanged. And for centuries they did. Each generation added to the house, layer by layer, era by era, until Eldenford became a living archive of English history. The medieval Great Hall, with its high ceilings and narrow windows designed for defense, gave way to Tudor chambers, wood-paneled rooms with intricate carvings and tapestries imported from France. The Georgian era brought the library, a two-story masterpiece of mahogany shelves and leather-bound volumes. Some of the books dated back further than the family itself, acquired through marriage alliances, estate sales, and the careful accumulation of knowledge across generations. The Victorians added the conservatory, a glass-roofed sanctuary filled with plants that had no business surviving in England's climate, kept alive through obsessive care in imported soil. But here's what made the Eldenfords different from every other noble family of their time. They never tore anything down. While other estates demolished old wings to build grander ones, while other families chased the latest architectural trends and modernized relentlessly, the Eldenfords preserved. Every room, every corridor, every artifact, even when styles changed, even when the house became a maze of mismatched eras, even when it would have been easier and cheaper to start fresh. Because somewhere along the line, preservation became more than tradition. It became obsession. By the 1700s, the family's wealth had begun to plateau. The merchant contracts that once fed their fortune were being lost to larger, more aggressive competitors. Land that had once been profitable became expensive to maintain, but the Eldenfords refused to sell. They polished ancestral portraits even as their treasury thinned. They repaired centuries-old beams while debts accumulated. They kept servants employed long after they could afford them, because the house requires care. And as the world outside transformed, industrial revolutions, political upheavals, empires rising and falling, the family withdrew deeper into Eldenford's walls. Younger members of the family began to leave in the 18s, drawn to cities, to progress, to lives that didn't revolve around maintaining a 1,000-year-old house. But they always came back. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. It was said among those who knew the family that after spending a single night at Eldenford, you felt the weight of every ancestor who had ever walked its halls. Some described it as comforting, a sense of continuity, of being part of something larger than yourself. Others found it suffocating. One diary entry from 1867, written by a young Eldenford heir who had tried to leave for London, captured the feeling perfectly. I cannot explain it. The house calls, not in words but in something deeper. I feel their eyes on me, all of them. Every portrait, every name carved into stone. They are watching, waiting, and I know even as I write this that I will return. I must. And he did. They all did. Until the early 20th century, when something happened that shattered the pattern. The details are murky. Family records from that period are incomplete. Pages torn from journals, letters deliberately destroyed, entire months of household accounts missing. But whispers survived. A fire that shouldn't have started. A forbidden romance that split the family. A betrayal so devastating that siblings stopped speaking and cousins disappeared into anonymity. No one knows the truth. What is known is that by 1920, Only one heir remained, Clara Eldenford. She was 28 years old, unmarried, the last of her line, and she inherited a house that had become both sanctuary and prison. For 3 years, Clara lived alone in Eldenford, or nearly alone. A handful of servants remained, though their testimonies vary wildly. Some said she spent her days restoring old furniture. Others claimed she wandered the halls at night, speaking to portraits as if they could answer. One account, given decades later by a former housemaid, described Clara standing in the sealed east wing, staring at the locked chamber door for hours without moving. She knew something was in there, the maid said. She was afraid of it, but she couldn't leave it alone. Then, in October of 1923, Clara disappeared. No note, no explanation, no body ever found. The servants arrived one morning to find the house locked from the inside. Every door bolted, every window latched. Clara's belongings remained in her room. Her coat hung by the door. The morning tea she'd requested sat cold on the kitchen counter. But Clara was gone. And Eldenford House, left exactly as she had kept it, began its long silence. For nearly a century, the estate sat untouched. Legal battles over ownership dragged on for decades. Distant relatives surfaced, each claiming a connection to the Eldenford line. But none could produce clear documentation. The family tree had been deliberately obscured, as if someone had tried to erase the bloodline from history. Eventually, the property passed to a preservation trust. Historians were granted access. Restoration began, and what they found inside defied every expectation. Because Clara hadn't abandoned the house. She had preserved it, perfectly, obsessively. As if she knew that one day someone would come looking, and that when they did, they would need to see everything exactly as it had always been. When the preservation team finally pushed open the doors of Eldenford House in 2019, they expected decay, rot, mold, the inevitable destruction that comes when a building sits untouched for nearly a century. Collapsed ceilings, shattered windows, the slow reclamation of nature through cracks in stone and warped wooden floors. What they found instead was impossible. The house was perfect, not pristine. There was dust, certainly. Cobwebs stretched across corners. The air was stale and cold, but the structure itself, the contents, the arrangement of every object within its walls, it was as if time had simply stopped. The lead historian, Dr. Margaret Ashford, described walking into the entrance hall as stepping into a photograph. Everything remained exactly where it had been left in 1923, and the deeper they went, the more unsettling the preservation became. In the drawing room, a chess game sat mid-match on a mahogany table. The pieces were positioned as if two players had been locked in strategic combat, one side clearly losing, the other poised for checkmate in 3 moves. But the players were gone. The chairs were pushed back slightly, as though someone had stood to leave. But the game remained suspended, waiting for a move that would never come. In the dining hall, the long table was set for 12 guests. Crystal glasses caught the dim light filtering through heavy curtains. Silverware lay precisely arranged on embroidered napkins. China plates, each one hand-painted with the Eldenford family crest, waited for a meal that had never been served. One of the researchers opened a sideboard and found wine bottles from 1921, still corked, labels intact. The meal was never eaten. The wine was never poured. And yet, someone had prepared for guests who never arrived. In the library, leather-bound journals lined the shelves. Some dated back to the 1600s. Family records, estate accounts, personal diaries written in fading ink by hands that had been dust for centuries. But it was the recent journals that stopped the researchers cold. On the desk sat a ledger dated October 1923, the month Clara disappeared. The entries were meticulous: household expenses, staff wages, repair schedules. The handwriting was neat, controlled, methodical. Until the final page. The last entry, dated October 14th, read simply, "The house demands its due. I have given everything. Perhaps it will be enough." Below that, the page was blank, but the pen still lay beside it uncapped, as if Clara had set it down intending to write more and never returned. Upstairs in the family wing, they found the bedrooms preserved like museum exhibits. The master chamber, presumably where Clara had slept, was Spartan. A narrow bed, a single wardrobe, a mirror covered with a cloth. When the researchers removed the cloth, they found the glass unbroken but streaked with something that looked like ash. No one could explain it. In one of the guest rooms, a trunk sat at the foot of the bed, lid open, clothes folded neatly inside as if someone had been packing or unpacking and stopped mid-task. A travel journal rested on top, dated 1919. Inside, one of Clara's relatives, a cousin perhaps, had written about plans to visit Eldenford for the holidays. The visit never happened. The trunk remained, frozen in preparation. Then they found the nursery. It was the smallest room in the house, tucked into a corner of the upper floor. But it was also the most unnerving. The room was filled with toys, wooden horses, hand-carved dolls, a rocking chair worn smooth by generations of children. A child's bed sat against the wall, covers turned down, as if waiting for a small body to climb in. But according to family records, no child had lived at Eldenford since the 1880s. Clara had been the last of her line. She had no children, no younger siblings. So why was the nursery preserved? Why were the toys arranged as if a child might return at any moment? One researcher found a music box on a shelf. When she opened it, a delicate tune began to play. Faint, haunting, perfectly intact after a century of silence. The team stood frozen, listening to the ghostly melody fill the empty room. Then came the discovery that changed everything. While documenting the layout of the house, structural engineers noticed inconsistencies. Walls that were thicker than necessary, spaces that didn't align with the floor plans, rooms that should have existed but didn't appear on any map. And then they found the hidden corridors. Behind a fireplace in the Great Hall, a stone panel pushed inward, revealing a narrow passage carved into the walls. It was barely wide enough for a single person, lit by thin slits that let in slivers of daylight. The passage wound through the house like a secret vein, connecting rooms that should have been separate, offering hidden routes between floors. But why? Were they escape routes? Servants' passages designed to keep staff invisible? Or were they something else? Corridors meant to move unseen through a house that was always watching. Behind a bookshelf in the library, they found another door. This one led to a staircase descending into darkness. A 15th century addition, according to the stonework, that spiraled down into what should have been the foundation. But instead of leading to a cellar, the staircase ended at a wall sealed from the inside, stone mortared shut. No door, no handle, no way through. Someone had built the staircase, descended into the depths of the house, and then sealed themselves in, or sealed something else out. Then they discovered the servants' wing, an entire section of the house that had been locked off from the main structure. Inside, they found rooms abandoned in haste, beds unmade, trunks half-packed, a door that had been locked from both sides, as if someone inside and someone outside had both tried to keep it shut, and scratched into the wood, almost invisible unless you knew where to look, were words, "Don't let it follow." But the most disturbing discovery was the room they couldn't enter. In the east wing, behind layers of locked doors and sealed hallways, they found a chamber with walls twice as thick as any normal construction. The door was reinforced with iron bars from the inside, bars that would have required someone to lock themselves in, not keep others out. Modern tools couldn't breach it. Drills broke, saws bent. The stone was harder than anything they'd encountered in the rest of the house. Ground-penetrating radar scans revealed shapes inside, furniture, perhaps, or stacked objects, but nothing conclusive. Just vague outlines and shadows that refused to resolve into anything recognizable. And no historical records mentioned its purpose. No blueprints, no family letters, no estate accounts explaining why a room would need walls that could survive a siege. All they knew was this. Clara had been found standing outside that door in her final days, staring at it, waiting for something. And when she disappeared, she left behind a house frozen in perfect stillness, a house that preserved every secret, every mystery, every unfinished moment, as if she had locked the doors not to keep people out, but to keep something in. Every house has secrets, a loose floorboard, a forgotten attic, a space beneath the stairs where children once hid. But Eldenford House didn't have secrets. It was a secret. As the preservation team continued their work, Mapping every corridor and documenting every artifact, a disturbing pattern emerged. The house had been deliberately designed to hide things, not from outsiders, from its own inhabitants. The hidden passages they discovered weren't anomalies. They were a system, a network of corridors, stairwells, and concealed doorways that threaded through the entire structure like veins beneath skin. Architectural historians brought in to analyze the construction confirmed what the team had begun to suspect. These passages had been added over centuries, generation after generation, each one building upon the last. The oldest dated back to the 15th century. Stone corridors barely wide enough for a single person, carved during a period when England was torn by civil war and noble families fortified their homes against invasion. But Eldenford had never been attacked. So why the escape routes? One passage ran from the family chapel directly to the servants' quarters, a route that would allow someone to move between the two unseen. Another connected the library to a concealed exit in the gardens, hidden behind a false bookshelf that operated on a counterweight mechanism so precise it still functioned after 500 years. But the most unsettling discovery was the passage that led nowhere. Behind a panel in the Great Hall, they found a corridor that descended into the foundations of the house. The walls were older than the rest of the structure, rough-hewn stone, blackened by centuries of moisture and darkness. The passage spiraled downward, deeper than any basement should go, past layers of construction that predated even Alaric's original build. And then it stopped. Not at a door, not at a cellar or storage room. At a wall, a solid wall of stone, sealed with mortar that had hardened to the consistency of rock. No hinges, no locks, no indication that it had ever been anything but a barrier. But there were marks on the wall, scratches, deep gouges in the stone, as if someone or something had clawed at it from the other side. Ashford ordered the wall examined. Carbon dating suggested the mortar was applied in the late 1600s, but the scratches were under the mortar, meaning whatever made them had been sealed in deliberately and left to die. No one wanted to speculate what could have made those marks. Then they found the servants' wing. Unlike the main house, which had been preserved with obsessive care, the servants' quarters had been abandoned in chaos. Beds were unmade, trunks lay half-packed. A meal sat rotting on a table, plates still holding food that had long since decomposed into unrecognizable shapes. It was as if the staff had fled in the middle of their daily routines. But fled from what? In one room, they found a diary belonging to a housemaid named Agnes Thorne, dated 1922, just a year before Clara disappeared. The entries started normally enough. Complaints about the notes about daily chores, observations about Clara's increasingly erratic behavior. But as the months progressed, the tone changed. June 3rd, heard footsteps in the East Wing again last night. Miss Clara says no one is permitted there. But the footsteps are real, I heard them. July 18th, the mirrors, I hate the mirrors. They show things that aren't there. Shapes, movements in rooms I know are empty. September 2nd. Mary quit today, said she saw someone standing in the hall, someone in old clothes like from a painting. When she approached, they vanished. Miss Clara didn't seem surprised. October 7th. We're leaving, all of us. Miss Clara offered more money, but it doesn't matter. Something is wrong with this house. Something has always been wrong. I don't know how the family lived here for so long. The final entry was dated October 10th, 1923, 4 days before Clara's last journal entry. The door in the East Wing is open. I don't know who opened it, but I saw Miss Clara standing in front of it. Staring inside, she was crying. I asked if she needed help. She looked at me and said, "It's been waiting all this time, and I'm the last one." Below that, Agnes had written one more line, pressed so hard into the page that the pen had torn through the paper. I'm not staying to find out what she meant. The servants never returned, and 4 days later, Clara vanished. But the door Agnes mentioned, the one in the East Wing, that door was the key to everything. The preservation team had known about it from the beginning. It was impossible to miss. A massive iron-reinforced door at the end of a long, isolated corridor. The kind of door you'd expect to find guarding a vault or a prison, But this door wasn't locked from the outside. It was barricaded from the inside. Iron bars had been welded across the frame. Stone blocks had been mortared into place behind the bars. The wood itself was reinforced with metal plates, bolted so tightly that even modern tools struggled to make a dent. This wasn't a door meant to keep people out. This was a door meant to keep something in. Ground-penetrating radar revealed the chamber beyond was large, roughly 30 feet by 40. The walls were twice as thick as any other room in the house, built with a type of stone that wasn't native to England. Imported, expensive, deliberately chosen for its density and strength. Scans showed shapes and said, furniture possibly, stacked objects. But the readings were inconsistent, distorted, as if something in the room was interfering with the equipment. One technician described the scans as looking through fog. Dr. Ashford consulted with structural engineers, historians, even a geologist specializing in medieval construction. No one could explain the purpose of a room built like a fortress inside a house. Theories emerged, each more unsettling than the last. Some believed it was a vault, a place where the family stored their most valuable possessions. But why seal it so completely? Why reinforce it to a degree that suggested paranoia rather than caution? Others thought it might be a hidden library. Eldenford was known for its collection of rare books and manuscripts. Perhaps the family kept their most dangerous or forbidden texts locked away, hidden from the church, from the crown, from anyone who might use them. But the most disturbing theory came from a historian specializing in medieval superstition and folklore. She suggested that the room wasn't built to store something. It was built to contain something. In the late medieval period, certain families, particularly those with wealth and influence, practiced what was euphemistically called preservation of legacy. When a member of the family committed an act too shameful to acknowledge publicly, they were sometimes erased from history, not killed, not exiled, hidden, locked away in rooms like this one, fed through slots in the door, kept alive but invisible. A secret the family would guard for generations, even after the person inside had long since died. It was a theory that explained the bars, the reinforcement, the deliberate isolation. But it didn't explain the scratches on the sealed wall in the basement, nor the diary entries about footsteps in empty rooms, or why Clara, the last heir, had stood before this door crying, saying, "It's been waiting, and I'm the last one." The preservation team debated for months about whether to open the room. Some argued it was a historical obligation, that whatever lay inside was part of the estate's story and deserved to be documented. Others believed the room should remain sealed, that some secrets are buried for a reason, that Clara had locked the house and disappeared because she knew what was inside and knew it should never be released. In the end, the decision was postponed indefinitely, not because of ethical concerns or historical debates, but because of what happened during the final scan. The team set up equipment one last time, hoping to get clearer readings. But as the radar pulse penetrated the walls, something changed. The shapes inside shifted, not the normal distortion caused by interference, but deliberate, coordinated movement, as if something in the room had been waiting, listening, and finally decided to respond. One technician swore he heard a sound through the door, not footsteps, not voices, but breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing, like something waking from a very long sleep. The equipment was packed up that night. The east wing was sealed off from the rest of the house, and the door remained closed. There are questions history can answer, and then there are questions history refuses to touch. Eldenford House stands today as it has for nearly 1,000 years, silent, watchful, holding its secrets like a clenched fist that will never open. The preservation work continues, though slowly. Researchers catalog artifacts, document architecture, trace the family lineage through fragmented records and fading photographs. But they do so with a kind of reverence that borders on fear. Because everyone who spends time inside Eldenford comes away with the same unsettling certainty. The house is not finished with its story. After the incident with the sealed chamber, the movement detected on the scans, the sound of breathing through a door that should guard nothing but dust and silence, the preservation team made a collective decision. Some doors are meant to stay closed, not because of what they might reveal about the prey, But because of what they might release into the present, the East Wing remains off limits. The iron-reinforced door stays sealed, and the room beyond, whatever it holds, whatever it guards, whatever has waited there for centuries, will continue waiting. But that decision came with a key, Armand, because now the question isn't just what the Eldenford family was hiding, it's why they stayed. Most families confronted with a house like this, a structure that demanded so much, that consumed fortunes and generations, that seemed to trap its inhabitants in an endless cycle of duty and obsession, would have walked away. Sold the land, burned the records, severed all ties to a legacy that had become a burden too heavy to carry. But the Eldenfords never left, not voluntarily. Generation after generation, they returned to the house. Even when it would have been easier to abandon it, they poured their wealth into its preservation. They kept secrets that fractured their family. They endured tragedies that would have destroyed any other lineage. And they did it all for one reason. Someone had to. Because Eldenford House wasn't just a home, it was a responsibility. A pact made centuries ago by a man who believed that some things must endure, no matter the cost. And that pact was passed down through bloodlines like an inheritance no one could refuse. Dr. Ashford, who spent 3 years studying the estate, described it this way. Eldenford isn't a house that people lived in. It's a house that lived through people. Each generation was just another caretaker, another guardian of something far older and far more important than their individual lives. And when the line finally ended with Clara, the house didn't die. It simply waited for someone else to understand what it was guarding. But what was it guarding? The theories are endless, and none of them fully satisfy. Some believe the sealed room contains documents, evidence of crimes, scandals, or alliances that could have rewritten English history if revealed. The Eldenfords were not royalty, but they moved in circles close enough to power that their secrets might have toppled dynasties. Others think the room holds objects, religious relics stolen during the Reformation, forbidden texts banned by the church, artifacts acquired through means the family could never publicly acknowledge. A few researchers, the ones who spent too many nights alone in the house, will say believe something else entirely. They believe the room contains a person, or what's left of one. Someone locked away generations ago for reasons so terrible that even death wasn't punishment enough. Someone whose existence was erased from every record, whose name was struck from every family tree, whose memory was deliberately destroyed. And that person, or whatever they became after centuries of isolation, is still in that room, waiting. It sounds like folklore, like ghost stories told to explain what logic cannot. But the scratches on the sealed wall weren't made by tools. The breathing heard through the door wasn't caused by air currents. And the servants who fled in 1923 weren't running from legends. They were running from something